Hello, my name is Davon Williams. I'm 6 feet tall and I'm based out of New York. When it comes to discussions about casting, that's often what we talk about, the slate. Actually, can I get my most recent slate? Hi, my name is Davon Williams. I'm 6 feet tall, based out of New York City, and I'm represented by ATB Talent. That's normally it. That's normal. That's what the hot debate is right now. Are we going to do slate side by side? Are we going to do all that? Today, I want to take a different approach. I actually want to go a little bit deeper. For anyone that's seeing this for the first time, hello, it's season 2, episode 8 of The Receipts with Davon Williams. And what we're talking about for this season is the Black Theater Matters bill in relation to the Actors Equity Association's inaugural convention. This is the first time we're ever doing this, where lay members, right now specifically for the Black Theater Matters bill, over 500 people have come together to figure out how do we make this union more equitable. Right now, we're in what I've been jokingly calling the Hunger Games, in which it's almost like the Oppression Olympics, where it's like, get these signatures, make sure you do this. This is a worthy thing, as opposed to just figuring out how to get everyone in. Hopefully next cycle that could be taken care of, but this time it is what it is. And the argument I'm making is that 500 people giving of their time who do not have a voice have come together and said, hey, consider these 12 items. Can I actually get the BTM bill one pager? So here, if you were to go to our website right now, we've written a 26-page bill, which outlines 12 important things, 12 important articles that we believe if these were adopted and worked on, even if they're passed and revised a little bit later by council, we fully believe that these 12 things can change the entire system and make it more equitable. We could take that down. At the end of this, we're going to get back to it. I'm going to read down those 12 right after this interview with Victor Vasquez from X Casting NYC. But before we do that, there's someone who can say this a lot better than I. Last week, we broke open the history of the Negro Actors Guild. The Negro Actors Guild, which was an incredible, informative episode. Some key takeaways is that history is kind of cyclical. Back then, the Actors Equity Association had made the decision that they weren't interested in representing Black actors or Black issues. That was not their purview. So the Negro Actors Guild was created as a benevolent organization to help get those rights for us. And through that work and through that organization, the Actors Equity Association changed its mind. They decided that, yes, we will represent Black actors. The Actors Equity Association, through that organization, was able to elect their first Black president in Fred O'Neill. Through that organization, we have what is today called the EEOC, which back then was called, I believe it was the Negro Committee or something of the like, in which they advocated for equality. A lot. They did a lot, and it affects us today. And now the baton passes on. And I think Damien can word what the issue is right now. Can I get Damien?
Hi, everyone. My name is Damian Thompson, and I'm a Eastern Principal Delegate. A lot of you had voted for me, and I appreciate that. You may or may not know that there's a Actors Equity Convention coming up. It's in April, and we have a lot of resolutions that are being put forward, ways that we're trying to make the union better. I'm sponsoring a bill that's called Transparency, Stand by Your Word. Again, the name of that bill is Transparency, Stand by Your Word. Now, I got into this whole, political thing because I'm trying to make a change and I'm trying to make our union better. A lot of the obstacles that I'm running into is that I don't know what's going on. And even as a member, a member that pays dues, just like you, it's imperative that we know what's going on. And a lot of the things that are set up is set up in such a way that it makes it hard for us to really understand and know what's going on. So what my bill does is my bill kind of puts the entire meeting that we have, these regional meetings, these national meetings, It puts them out there so that the members have access to them, because that's the reason why we're paying dues, right? We should be able to know what's going on within our union. It's also pushing for the idea that if you have a vote for a certain topic, that each member has to vote, and their vote has to be recorded so that we know who is voting for what, right? The idea is the more we know who is voting for what is the more that we know the people that we voted for and put in places of power are actually carrying out what they say they're going to do, and also what we ask them to do, which is why you voted for them in the first place. So I'm asking you to call your Eastern delegates, call your Western delegates, call your Central delegates, email them. I will have a link in this video, this post. We'll have a link of all the Eastern, Western, and Central delegates for you to reach out to. Reach out to them and let them know, put your signature on the transparency bill. Stand by your word. Transparency, stand by your word. Thank you. I'll continue sending out videos each day just to remind you and to get the momentum going. But this is something that we cannot afford to let slide. Yeah, this is something that we have to stand up to right now and let people know that we want transparency. We want to know what's going on within the union. We as members that are paying dues, we're not silent. We're here to be active. And to be active, we have to know what's going on. So thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. Just DM me, call me, and we'll settle that. Okay? Talk to you soon.
Transparency. Stand by your word. Reach out to your AEA delegates and council and tell them to support this bill.
That's great. He just posted that, so I didn't get to see the full thing. I was just like, let it run. This is great. So Damian Thompson, thank you again for being on the show last week, and it's great to see you out there in those digital streets, letting the members know what's going on. And there are other delegates. There's 200 of us. Some of us are doing the same exact thing. So yeah, if you're a member and you're catching this episode, please, please, please engage in this first convention. So much change can come out of this if there's more eyes and more people engaged. Our membership, our rules, we get to make the change. So now that we got that out the way, can I get this intro video?
Our journey on the road to the convention is officially halfway done, and what a ride it has been. We introduced the Black Theater Matters Bill, discussed the state of American theater, questioned policymakers on progress, discovered childcare obstacles parent actors face, explored true activism, learned how to sue the union, uncovered a better auditioning system, and recognized the Negro Actors Guild's contribution to Black art. Our next stop will investigate the union between actors and casting directors and how the collective can create a more equitable industry. Joining this conversation is Victor Vasquez, founder of X Casting. Operating through a shared purpose toward collective liberation and anti-racism, X Casting reimagines the art of casting. Victor's work is dedicated to supporting projects led or created by Black, Indigenous people of color, women, trans, and queer creators in New York City, Los Angeles, and globally. Victor's new play and new musical projects include the Royal Court Theatre in London's West End, the Ronald O. Perlman Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center, and the Kennedy Center, among others. Recently, Victor served as casting director for the ACLU NYCLU Singing Out for Freedom benefit. He also taught an anti-racist theater course at Carnegie Mellon University School of Drama. He's the proud son of Mexican immigrants, Spanish is his first language, and he holds a master's degree with distinction from the University of Oxford in the UK. Victor is a member of the Casting Society of America and a 2020 Theater Communications Group Rising Leader of Color. Next stop, an equitable industry for all. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Thank you, Napoleon. Snaps. Are you justice? Did you justice?
That is the best introduction I've ever seen in my life. Like that is, I feel so loved. Thank you. It's just so great. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. All right, so I know everyone's here for one question. We're here talking about equality, but I know everyone wants to know, what are your thoughts on the new slate fad of splitting the slate?
I didn't even know it was a fad, but like I've been seeing it more on my end, and I've actually been telling people, I'm like, I really love this. And so people have been reaching out, and they're like, even in my DMs on Facebook, and they're like, hey, what do you prefer? And I'm like, I really like it. I like exactly what you showed as your slate, where you come in on the side, you turn around, and then you go out, and it's all one frame. I mean, I think it's great. You're so efficient. Because the thing about this is like it's using technical advantage to be more efficient, to tell your story however you want to tell it. So
all right, great. And that's been our interview with Victor. Now, no, here's a question that I always like to ask casting directors, because I feel like your job is so connected to identity in the real world and superficial world. So I always like to ask Victor Vasquez, how do you identify?
Yeah, thank you for that. And self-identification is important. It's an important value for me that I like to model and practice myself, because I believe that when we model self-identification, it makes space for others to self-identify as well. And so for me, I self-identify as Mexican-American, as a Spanish, it's my first language. I'm the son of Mexican immigrants. I identify as a Angelino because I'm native to Los Angeles. I was born in Compton, and I identify as queer as well. And so I live here in New York City with my partner Brian, and I hold all those parts of my identity. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. When it comes to, I always like to call it the balance. How do you find those things intertwining in your life? What do you think is noticed first, and what do you believe you lead with?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of what's noticed first, I don't even know, right? Because like the thing that I also want to acknowledge is that I walk this in this country, the United States, and in this world with privilege as well, right? That I am light skinned. I am, this is the color of my skin. And so in terms of how I'm perceived and how I see myself, I don't know. I don't even like to negotiate sort of like the question of how I'm seen, because I really think that this is like the core of the question for me in casting. It's like the core question is, how do I belong on my own terms? And in a lot of ways, the way that I've even inhabited this position in casting, I've been asking that question for myself, right? How do I belong on my own terms? And then how do I allow other people to belong, but on their own terms, where I'm not dictating how I see you, but you're telling me, because I am attempting to make a space to say that you're safe here to communicate who you are on your own terms, right? And so I think that it's a sort of like, double sort of sided conversation for me, where I'm like, I'm not really interested in how I'm perceived, because I really think that I lead with, self-identification, with leading by example. And also I think that I deserve, just like everyone else, the right to show multitudes, right? And that even as I sit in the chair of a casting director, that I not many people who have had my experience are sitting in those chairs. And so how do I want to fill it? And how do I make space for others to fill it on their own terms as well? So I guess maybe that's how I'm answering that question. I don't know if you want to ask like a follow-up, but there's that.
No, we're gonna totally get back to it. I just wanted to set the stage, because I feel that a lot of this bleeds through your work. Can I get the X casting? So X casting, which Victor is the founder of. Xcasting is dedicated to radically changing these numbers by supporting projects led or created by Black, Indigenous people of color, women, trans, and queer creators in NYC, Los Angeles, and globally. So with that statement, it just stuck out to me. It's why you're a guest today. Walk me through what inspired you to create Xcasting, what the mission is, and why you've decided to lead with this.
So, I guess let me start off by going way back, right? I don't come from like the arts were not integral to my development as a child, nor to my development as a teenager. Meaning that I didn't know what theater was until I was 17, right? Theater didn't exist in my community. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where like the way that my parents decided to keep their sons safe, I'm one of 4 boys, right, was that we were going to play sports. And so we always had something to do. Like we went to school and we played sports nonstop every year for like the entire duration of our schooling. So from like, you know, elementary to graduating high school, I played 5 different sports. And for me, it was that first sort of experience of getting to know theater, because the boy I had a crush on invited me because his church gave him 2 free tickets to see The Lion King at the Pantages Theater. And when I said yes to that invitation, I didn't know what I was saying yes to, but I knew that I was saying yes to sitting next to him for 2 hours. So like I said yes, and I fell in love. I fell in love with not him, but with the theater. I fell in love with what I was seeing. And I was like the first person in my family to go to college, to be accepted to an university. And I had applied to go into law because I was really passionate about politics. And after seeing that show, I had already been accepted to as an English major at UC Irvine. And when I got there, I added theater to my double major. And I emphasized in directing and writing. So I did 2 majors. And for me, I found my way into theater after that, because I started creating my own projects, right? I found out how to be a producer. I found out how to be a writer. I found out how to be a director. And I was asking a lot of questions as an outsider because I didn't grow up in this tradition. And I felt like the tradition didn't really invite me, actually, right? The tradition, I fell upon the tradition. I made myself, I announced my place in the tradition. And when I was in Los Angeles, I started working for regional theaters. I worked at Center Theater Group. I worked at Pasadena Playhouse. And I strengthened my muscles as a producer. That's where I learned everything there is to producing theater, right? How to be a general manager, how to be a company manager, how to contract directors, writers, and actors with different unions, how to cast. I was paper casting, workshops for new plays and new musicals, and then and working to produce new projects. And so I say all that because in no way is my trajectory into the casting world traditional, right? Most people who enter or have entered the casting space before have worked themselves up from like internships to assistants to associates to them being casting directors. I didn't do that. I sort of hijacked the situation in a totally different way, where I learned how to do every other job in the American theater. And then I started casting, right? And so I was bringing into my space a lot of things, my pockets were full with a lot of tools that had nothing to do with casting. And so when I finally, I worked in regional theaters for about 6 years before I got my job offer at Arena Stage to run their casting office as the casting director and line producer there. And when I inherited that seat, right, this is major American theater institution in Washington, D.C., at the top of the Trump administration, I was sitting in this chair and I just asked myself, how can I use this position of power in a way to ensure that the audience that's coming to this theater in Washington, D.C., which the audience are judges, right? Our audiences include Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It included senators. It included American politicians, lobbyists, etc., right? How can I subvert this conversation on an American stage a few blocks away from the White House by putting people of color on that stage and by ensuring that the stories, that not just the stories, but the bodies that they come see are representative of American portrait, right? And so for me, it became political, 100%. I was in DC at the top of the Trump administration. How could it not be political? And I started asking these questions by really just like, you know, there was moments where I'd be in the audition room because I was auditioning in DC, New York a lot. And I would notice in DC and in New York that when I was auditioning actors, they would bring a sort of trauma into the room sometimes. And after you audition hundreds and thousands, right, just thousands of actors, you start noticing patterns. And one of the devastating heartbreaks that I started noticing was that the majority of actors who are Black, Indigenous, or POC who are walking into this audition room were bringing something with them that I wish that I could sort of take away from them, which was that like trauma of having to put themselves in this rigmarole over and over and over again, right? And for me, I just started asking him, like, what is going on? What has happened historically that has harmed people as they come into audition rooms, and that they now think that the audition room is a battleground, is a place that is limiting, that is a space that doesn't hold, you know, doesn't care for them. And immediately I just started asking the question. I'm like, okay, this is happening particularly to POC folks. And the question then became for me, where are the rest of the casting directors of color in New York City or in the East Coast? And, you know, I started meeting them. I started asking around because I wanted to meet, you know, this community and ask if they were experiencing the same things, if they were noticing the same things behind the table. Right, as you know, and as a lot of viewers know, that our numbers even behind the table are very limiting. They're very limited, and we exist, right? There are Black casting directors, there are Indigenous casting directors, there are POC casting directors, and they're here in New York City, but in terms of percentages, we're still looking at like over a 90% homogenous community in the casting. And that homogenous community is Anglo white, you know, casting directors. And so then I started asking this other question where I'm like, how are actors, even just in New York City, negotiating this? But do we not see how they are existing in that imagination predominantly? Right? And for me, I never sort of sought out to create my own company. It became a sort of like, I was aware that there was a problem, and I kept asking people around me, like, hey, do you think it's a problem? Is it a problem? Where are we? Like, how are we switching this upside down? How are we entering that space and disrupting it from the inside? And I started pitching this idea. I'm like, well, what does it mean to decenter whiteness in the casting process and to center Black folks and to center Indigenous folks and to center queerness? And what does that look like? Because I know that from a casting standpoint, what we do is curatorial, meaning that we are curating the imagination of culture, right? Because you know, I know that it's like casting directors are not making the ultimate decisions about who gets cast, but we are curating who you director, who you writer, who you producer see. We are curating those lists. We are curating those relationships. We are curating the people we advocate for, right? And so in a lot of ways, we are curators of a global imagination. And when the curators all represent one homogeneous identity, is it outrageous to have a hypothesis that says, well, is there a correlation between that and how white actors are overrepresented on almost every single stage, on screen and television, and in film?
Can I pause you really quick for the audience?
Go ahead.
So Victor just dropped something really great. I want to put this into context. Can I get Be an Arts Hero? So on season 2, episode 1, I broke the news led by Be an Arts Hero because I want you all to go to that website. The arts and culture is big business. A lot of times you hear, oh, theater, oh, goodness, entertainment. If you could do something else, do something else. It's a lot more secure. However, what a lot of lay artists don't know is that over $877 billion is produced by the arts and culture. That's over 5 million jobs. That's 4.5 of the GDP. That is an incredible amount of that's an incredible amount of money and contribution. Can I get the AAPAC? So, and this is also on your website, Victor. So I was like, oh, we're on the same page about this one. But on episode 1, season 2, we also highlighted which sector is more likely to hire BIPOC artists. And what we found is the nonprofit sector and Broadway are very much the same. And now to really drive this home, can I get the Hollywood report? Here. What's funny is that these numbers don't really match where we are as a society. So if you see US population shares, white and minority, 1960 to 2050, by 2050, minority, which, that word is a little triggering for me. So I'm going to say marginalized groups will outnumber what's perceived right now as the majority, which is white. So Victor, with what you're saying, now that we drove that home, how does that affect us? What's happening in those casting rooms?
Listen, you're speaking my language. And I'm glad that we're getting to the numbers. I want to start off by saying that there's this really great quote by Brene Brown where she says, in the absence of data, we will continue to make up stories. So let me say that again. In the absence of data, we will continue to make up stories. And this is why data is so crucial to me, because I'm like, look, we got to look at the data because that's going to tell us the story. And I'm glad that you pulled up the data. These are reference points that I use all the time. The UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report for people out there. It's produced every single year by the School of Social Sciences. And then the APAC report, right, for stages here in New York City. And then also something else that I point people to is the Actors Equity Association Diversity Report of 2017, and then the second one that followed it up. These 3 reports are super important. And what your point about, you know, this the economic driving engine that the arts sector is real. And so I always want to sort of spend time not just talking about the arts for its importance culturally, but I always also talk about the importance of arts and its importance economically. And when we look at actors, it's exactly what it is. Casting is an employment process. Casting is an employment process, right? And for me, so much of this tradition historically in the last 100 years, right? Because casting is a pretty new venture, even still. And the sort of new conclusion that I'm drawing is that, okay, the dominant culture in America is market exchange. And market exchange is infused into the arts sector, so much so that in casting, right? Let's talk about casting. What has happened to the actor is that the actor is made into a commodity. Okay, so market exchange culture makes an actor into a commodity. Right? When an actor is made into a commodity, they are given value only when they are valuable to someone else. So they're given value when they're valuable to a production, to a producer, to a director, to a project, to a film, to a TV show, right? That actor then can gain value more so in their career, and then they can grant value to a project themselves later, right? But let's stick to this sort of cycle. So market exchange culture, commodification. What then happens after that? If we commodify actors, it's so easy to go down to objectifying them.
Yes.
Right? And when we objectify actors, that's when the casting process is like, well, can you be more spicy? Can you be more this? Can you be more that? Like, I am objectifying you. Can you be more of this? Right? And then what happens after that step is dehumanization. We dehumanize our artists. So this is just a cycle that sort of keeps going around and round and round, and it's so prevalent in casting. And what I'm saying to people is, like, if we look at the numbers and we look at the culture that's driving these numbers, we can stop that. I don't have the solution to how to stop it, but I am dedicated and invested in finding processes that disrupt that, right? And so even just like, you know, the data that you shared, like, I'm always baffled when people are like, well, you know, it's not that bad. And I'm like, no, it's bad. It's bad. It's so bad that, like, the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report, which, if we just look at television, there are over 500 television series that are written and shot every year, right? And the Hollywood Diversity Report says in the last report that 2 out of 10 leads in television are cast by Black, Indigenous, POC actors. 2 out of 10. That is so disproportionate to a jobs market that is on a national scale, because in order to be equitable across a sort of national analysis, those numbers would need to more than double. So I just don't get it. I'm just like, we are not hiring actors, Black, Indigenous, POC actors. We're hiring them only like at a 50% rate, right? And some people are saying that they should be grateful for that. And what I'm saying is that actually this is a national crisis that is pointing to a job discrimination case. And somebody please fix it, right? And so for me, I'm just like, this is how with X casting, for me, my time and my energy are valuable because of the position that I get to sit in. And it's important for me to acknowledge that, right? Because in a lot of ways, I can be, or my position can be, a gatekeeper, right? As I mentioned, like the curatorial process. But if I spend my time, my energy, and my focus and my mission, this mission, Xcasting's mission, is about centering folks who have been, you know, I like to use the word excluded because it's more active. For me, it's actually more appropriate than marginalized, than unrepresented. It's like, it's active in exclusion. If I center the folks who have been excluded from our industry, then that is my own process of reinverting that pyramid.
I'm going to let that land for a little bit. I'm just going to let it land. I feel like we don't get to hear that a lot. I could even let me put that in perspective for a life of an actor. When I came out of school in Philadelphia, I think I was one of the worst people to be around. I think I was legit one of the worst people to be around. And I think it answers kind of what you're saying when you go like, I want to make this better, still exploring how to make it better. And what I'm learning is sometimes history and context is sometimes all it takes. Because as you know, historically, marginalized groups get their history wiped out. In season 2, episode 1, we talk about Oklahoma. On the screen were 2 people out of the 3 people who ever played Curly and were Black. 2 out of 3 in all of America, which says a lot because historically, Black cowboys were all over the place when Oklahoma was a territory. it was wiped out, history was rewritten. And when people think Oscar and Hammerstein's Oklahoma, they think white, which is a very subtle and interesting thing. So back to like Philadelphia, I'm upset. I don't know the data. I don't know my history. I didn't even know the Negro Actors Guild was around. I didn't know the story of Lena Horne. I just knew she existed. So here I am being like, God, I suck. God, these people, all this stuff is unfair. I decide I want to move to LA. I start doing all this data work and I start finding these numbers. And I find that I'm one of many. I'm finding that it's not so much about me as much as it's about the system and the discrepancies. Because one thing, and I love asking this question to actors, is when, BIPOC actors specifically, when's the last time you got to be basic? I feel like we're not always given the permission to be basic. You always have to be 10 times greater. And for me, it's always been true equality is when we see basic across the board. Like when we can go, oh, that's basic. Oh, that's basic. And not, oh, this audience was basic, but that Audra, oh, this audience, this group was basic, but wow, that one Black guy who was third person to the ensemble should have done more. So my question to you when it comes to casting, when a BIPOC person comes into your office, how often are they permitted to have a bad day? How often are they permitted to be human and basic before it's like, you know what? We just can't afford it. There's not enough room for you.
Yeah, you know, I think what needs to be said in that, in what you're asking, is that there is such a expectation for exceptionalism, right? And that we sometimes draw ourselves to the ground in pursuit of exceptionalism, because in order for us to even inhabit space, we feel that we have to like show up even more, like do the double work, right? And I hate that. And I think what you're pointing to is like such a great question, because it actually asks for me, how can we hold imperfection, right? How can we hold the opposite of that white supremacist characteristic, which is perfection, right? Which doesn't exist. But for me, I am asking that question about how that exists in my processes, and even right now during a pandemic, during, you know, such an awful, violent year for Black folks and POC folks. I put out a callback recently, and in my callback packet for X casting is a note rejecting imperfection. Literally, that's what it says. It says a note rejecting perfection. And the note rejecting perfection says like, hey, we're asking a lot from you. It's okay if you want to submit videos that you've pre-recorded in the past that show this or that. Like, we just need to be able to see this or that. If you don't got energy today or this week to record something new, it's okay. If you can't do these two things, just do this one thing, right? Or if you just want to, like, it's like, and if you need anything else, like, here's my personal email, reach out to me. We'll talk about it. But I'm just sort of like negotiating, like, this is the communications that I sent to agents, to managers, to actors, and I'm just testing things out, right? Because I don't have all the answers. I am figuring it out. But it's that sort of like, how do I hold space for imperfection even in the virtual world? Because I know that I can do that in the room, right? I know that actually adjustments in the room with actors, that is the most generous thing that somebody can give, because you're allowing them to play, right? You're allowing them to show you like, okay, you got that out of your system. Cool. Let's do it again. All right, let's do it one more time, right? And so I'm figuring that out right now still. But it's a question that I'm asking. It's like, how do we hold room for somebody to be basic, right? To just tell us that they're not having a good week. Because I sometimes ask for that myself, right? I ask for people to give me grace and to give me love in a time when I need it. And so I'm just wondering, how do we even extend that from casting to actors, or from casting to agents and managers to actors? And I'm curious, like it's the part of this field that I wish that we have these conversations more often, because it's about like, well, what are you doing and what have you tried? One of the things that I tried last year in January when I was doing auditions here in New York was a new I was trying a new policy for auditions. This was when we were auditioning in person, right? And I wrote the longest policy on breakdown. And it was audition policy on pregnant, parenting, caretaking members of our community. And this was adapted from examples that were shared by Dr. Melissa Cheney, Oregon State University. It's like people in other industries have been grappling with this question before. And so I was wondering, what does it look like for us to hold space in an actual audition space for actors who are caretakers? And not just parents, because caretaking looks different for different people, right? But like, as a caretaker, how do you come to an audition when you can't hire somebody to babysit or to watch your parent or your loved one that you're caretaking for, and you still want to have a career as an actor? And these are the sort of like policies that I'm feeling like I am testing out in a way, right? Where I'm like, what does it look like if we introduce this and layer it with that and layer it with this? Because ultimately what I'm asking is, how do we model belonging? How do we model belonging for actors where they feel that they can come into a space and feel like they belong? And again, that looks different for everyone, right? Like, I hold multitudes, you hold multitudes, we all hold multitudes. So how do we make space for those different parts of our identities to feel welcomed? It's not just about the color of your skin, but it's about your whole experience, your wholeness, right? And that's like the level at which my analysis, like that's where I want to examine this space in.
This is what I find interesting. You brought it up, so I have to like hit it and get a reaction from you. This season, we also had Rachel Hewitt Spencer and the Broadway Babysitters on the show to talk about caregiving because it's such a polarizing thing in our union. The 13th article, which we had to pull for this convention, and hopefully we get to get it for the second convention, was regarding caregiving. And the idea was that in case of emergency, producers have a nice little small fund of $500, which when reaching out to producers and bargaining partners of the Actors Equity Association, a lot of them said, I didn't realize how cheap that could be. Because when we lose an actor due to caregiving emergencies, that's expensive. That's more expensive than this plan. However, when brought to counselors, just having little pre-meetings, the overarching idea is that these people chose to have children. I didn't choose to have children. So why would I advocate for that when I could be advocating for more money in all of our pockets? How do you hear that? How does that fall on your ears?
Say that one more time for me. Can you break it down for me? So what do you
I'll
mean
break
by
it down even more.
Yeah.
So essentially the arguments being that there is a chance where we could negotiate with producers when it comes to caregiving, not just children, but with also adults, that in case of emergency, there'd be a fund set aside. Kind of like, with healthcare, our union healthcare, how there's something set aside in case of emergency, that money is used so that an actor can be a caregiver without having to leave their job. Because again, they can leave the job. It's going to be more expensive for the producers sometimes, especially in the middle of a run if they don't have understudies. And that person loses a source of income, which they could probably use for that caregiver. For that caregiving situation. So when we bring it to counselors and their argument back at us is, well, they chose to have children. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is just to audition. So how does that help all of us? How does that fall on your ears, especially when it comes to auditions and people just trying to have a more equitable space so it's fair?
Yeah. It's this really brings up a question for me. I want to show this book because I have a few books here just in case I wanted to reference anything. But it's this book called Turn This World Inside Out, The Emergence of Nurturance Culture, right? And it's by Nora Samaran. And I'm really enjoying, or I enjoyed reading it because it really opened up for me this sort of topic of nurturance, and not just how we nurture ourselves, but how we nurture our community and how we nurture others. Because in nurturing ourselves, we are also making space to nurture others. And when we nurture others, we are also making space to nurture ourselves, right? And so this idea that someone chose to have a family and that somehow that's impacting me, or I should not care about that, feels like the opposite of nurturance. And what I'm sort of like, my question in that space and in the casting space is, how can we actually make space for all of us to bring our whole selves into this conversation, right? Because just because you don't hold a current disability doesn't mean that you will never be part of the disability community. So does that conversation relate to that? So I'm asking people listening that we really have to consider and negotiate how we exist in this ecosystem. And if we want to exist in this ecosystem through a culture of nurturance or a culture of market exchange. Because if it's a culture of market exchange, as I referenced before, you're just going to continue that cycle for yourself and for others. And that doesn't really make space for us as a whole community to thrive. I mean, so that's what I got on that. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me again, just because it was the most recent episode, that Negro Actors Guild back in the day, Actors Equity Association being like, hey, Black people, not our purview, and how you had to create this whole other guild to get them to go, okay, might be our purview. It might be something. And you see it today with Spanish speaking theaters, in which Actors Equity goes, yes, we have jurisdiction over theaters, but Spanish speaking theater, no, we can look. The Yiddish theater, we'll take it, but Spanish speaking theater, meh. We even get pushback because it's in the Black Theater Matters bill of Spanish speaking theaters, cruise jobs, drag performers, and they go, I don't know. I don't even now, certain people don't want to sign because the question is, well, are we prepared to take Spanish speaking theater? Will that really help us? Is that culture really relevant? I find that to be really interesting.
Okay, let me back that up. So, okay, before I go into that, because I feel very passionate about this, let me share a little bit about, you touched on some really important numbers a while back, right? Where you were talking about the sort of inversion of population, right? Majority minority flip, right?
Yeah.
That's already happened. So let me just tell it, everybody listening, it's already happened, it's happening, and it will continue to happen. So what I mean by that is, if we look at the Economic Policy Institute report, which was published in 2016, which is based on the projections from the US Census Bureau of 2010, not the latest ones in 2020, because those have been released yet, but the Economic Policy Institute did this study, an analysis, where they found that in 2014, the majority minority population flipped for students in public education all across the United States. So what that means is that if you were in public education from kindergarten to high school in 2014, white people in that demographic became the minority, and Indigenous POC folks became the majority. That was in 2014. So it's of no surprise that as we look to Gen Zers, right, and younger folks, that they have a different analysis of race. They have a different analysis of how to care for one another and their politic for that, right? For millennials, all right, and this is not just even millennials, but well, I think it does account just for millennials. This year in 2021, those who are in the age range of 25 to 34, who are in the workforce in the United States of America, the flip happens this year. So for a majority of us, as we look to our left and we look to our right, we are seeing the majority of folks in our workforce are actually Black, Indigenous, POC, and the white folks are the minority. The major flip will not happen for the rest of the workforce until 2029, when 25 to 54-year-olds, BIPOC folks, will be the majority of the workforce in the United States, right? So you gave projections for 2050, but that's for the entire population of the United States. If we're just looking at the workforce, that's already happening, and it will continue to happen in this decade. And so as producers, as casting directors, as agencies, as management companies, as general managers, as we all grapple with this conversation, it's of no surprise that 2020 hit the way it did, because it was the beginning of a decade that's going to see radical shifts in arts, culture, and every single industry, and the way that we negotiate with the workforce. Because white people are the minority. And so what does that mean? We can no longer allow for the white community to be overrepresented in our industry, because that is showing that equity is failing. Not equity like actors' equity, but like the concept of equity is failing us. And so what more can we do to ensure that the workforce is representative of a national standard? Because right now, arts, theater, TV, and film is falling behind. And it's impacting not just us and our imaginations, right? It's actually impacting the sustainability and the future of Black, Indigenous, POC actors and artists. Because when we extend a contract of employment to an actor, that is money in their pocket that they can decide and choose to continue to sustain themselves in this industry, right? Right now, we've had an entire year of a pandemic. This month marks a year since New York closed its theater industry. And how are we taking care of actors, and how will we continue to take care of actors? And not just actors as a blanket body, but predominantly, how will we center the workforce that is Black, Indigenous, POC within our acting community?
Spanish-speaking theaters.
Yes, great. Now to that. For me, it boils down to how do we continue to center the margins, right? And we use this word marginalization in such a like passe way, but actually it's very violent, because it has active ramifications. Because when we marginalize someone, we literally push them aside. We literally say, you are not important right now to be at the center of this conversation. And for me, my assignment that I give myself every day in my anti-racist, right, practice is how do we center those who have been marginalized? Because I don't want to continue to perpetuate that marginalization. Heck, I don't even like using the word marginalization, because for me, again, the right word is exclusion. How can we center those who we have excluded? And so I think for me, like when we talk about Spanish-speaking theaters, doesn't it feel like we're putting them out there over there? Doesn't it feel like we're saying it's not important right now, we can't really center that conversation, so we're just going to put it aside? It's so easy to put things to the side because it's so difficult to confront a problem. And for me, I'm just, I think what changes, what's different other than language? Isn't music a different language? Right? And how dare we take a film like Minari? Is it just called Minari? I'm failing on the name. The Korean film that was just
Parasite.
No.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's Minari. Minari, the film that just
okay.
won a Golden Globes award for best foreign film. But it's a story about an American family, right? And just because it's in a different language, we've designated it as foreign. And it's so easy for us to do that as a culture because we cannot grapple or confront the fact that America is not just an English-speaking country.
Mm.
We are ignoring and wanting to exclude the Spanish language as part of our cultural imagination because we think it's foreign. And yet Latina people make up a majority, I don't know what, 25% of the population, and it's growing. It's the fastest growing population in America. And we're saying that the language is foreign. It's very much an American thing. So how do we accept that? You know, so I think that, yeah, for me, it's a question about centering the margins.
Speaking of margins, there's something I've always wanted clarity on. Latin versus Latinx versus Latina. Can you break this down?
Sure. That's a great question. I Latino, Latina, right, with the O and the A are gendered, right? And very much of the Spanish language is gendered, right? We finish different words with different vowels, right? If something has a masculine ending or a feminine ending, and it's very much about like this in a way colonizers' language that we've inherited in a forced way as a country in Mexico. And then when we talk about the Latina community, well, there is, and I was just seeing a Twitter thread about this a few weeks back, where there was a misconception that academia invented the word Latinx, right? And that the Latina community does not accept the Latinx, designation because you can't say it in Spanish and because academia invented it. But if you go on Twitter, there's a whole bunch of people saying, no, that's not true. Black, POC, Latine folks invented that term in order to be more gender inclusive of queer communities and queer bodies. And so there's a bit of a debate there about the origin of that term. But there's also this other gender neutral term that's Latine, with the E at the end, Latine. And the thing that I want to point to is that these terms are not as easily diasporic as we think they can be. Because Latin America, it includes a vast number of countries, and each of them with their own histories, each of them with their own relationships to the United States of America, each of them with their own traumas to colonizers, right? And so I find it more for me as a practice to self-identify with the country of origin that my family history derives from. So that's why I identify as Mexican American, because for me, it's not just allowing this umbrella term to define me, but it's me acknowledging that my history is integral. It's intergenerationally connected to Mexico. And that while I can speak to my negotiation to Mexico, I cannot speak to my negotiation to Cuba or Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or to Brazil or to Ecuador or to, I can't speak to those other countries because there are other countries, right? It's not like saying you're from the United States. It's not, it's different. And so I think that for me, I think that what is important is that we allow space for people to self-designate as they wish, and that we should not judge them for the way that they choose to designate, and that we can practice specificity because it's helpful when we're dealing with diasporas. And so that is my my sort of analysis of those three different sort of, terms.
I think a lot about epistemic injustice and the idea that I am dark skinned. So even when it comes to an email or anything like that, I always try to tone police myself and go, how do I make it to where something is not going to be considered aggressive? And then I think it was the start of 2021. I just said, forget it. I'm just going to write what I feel. And if you take it, we'll deal with it from there. When it comes to colorism, how does that apply to you in the world of casting? And how do you see it enacted, that idea of colorism almost as a weapon?
Yeah, I think having, it's a lens, right? And again, an analysis that we need to confront and bring into the room all the time. And it's part of my process. And as I mentioned in the top of this, right, I also self-identify my own privilege in space, where I say, yeah, like, even though I am the son of immigrants and Spanish is my first language and my family's from Mexico, I walk in this country with the privilege of this skin tone, right? And in my process, I grapple with that as well, where for me, let's sort of just break it down. When a casting director is working on a project, they start off by creating a list, right? So list is probably the most said word in our industry and on the casting side, lists, right? Because the moment we start working for somebody or somebody hires us, they're like, can we see a list for this character? Can we see your top ideas for this, right? And for me, the way that the traditional list has always existed is a Word document or an email where literally it's just names. Names listed. And the names become commodities, right? Because if you don't know this name, you don't care. Next, who else is on the list? Oh, these top 5 people I know. And you can't see them. You can't see all of them in relation to one another. So you're working off of these blank spaces as if this is a poem that, like it's just like black and white. And I started changing the way I do lists a few years back, where I attach photos to my lists. So it's like photos, name, photo, name, photo, name, photo, name, because then we get a visual representation of the list. I can immediately see if I'm only sharing 20 names, if I'm sharing 40 names, if I'm sharing 100 names, I can see the trends of my own bias. I can see, oh, wait, we're telling one story here. No. Okay, remove, start over, right? And it's more helpful, I have found in my process, that when I'm actually talking to directors and writers and producers, if we all have visual representation of actors, we can start asking questions with a deeper analysis, where we can ask about colorism and have a conversation about it. We can say, why is it that in the imagination of this story, of this script, we are only talking about these kinds of actors for that role, right? And then it becomes a conversation, because I really think about the sort of decisions that are made as an alchemy. It's like sort of like a magical coming together of different sort of things, and we have to understand what's the collective picture here. Because I really think that a lot of times these things go unnoticed, or a decision is made and then retroactively they get in trouble for it, right? Where they're like, oh, how could we cast the only black person as the villain? And it's like, well, why didn't nobody catch that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, that's become integral to the way I work on a just like a basic level, right? Where a way to look out if our biases are leaning towards colorism, we can catch it and we can have a conversation about it, and we can collectively problem solve and say that is not what we want to do. What is it that we want to do here? So
when looking up your website, there was something that blew my mind. In the development of the Black Theater Matters bill, we again talked to people like Jane Elliott, you know, blue eyes, brown eyes, like just all these random people from the NAACP. And there were certain patterns that came up of these are real actionable steps that you can do. When I went to your website, this is the moment I was like, he has to be a guest. Can I get action steps? There we go. So on your website, you have an outline of practices that we can do. You said these are immediate things. Number one, work with transparency. Integrate care and consent as pillars of our casting work. Create an equitable and transparent payment structure. Activate an accountability process. Add an anti-racist policy to our agreements. So in the world of Actors Equity, our collective bargaining agreements. And add land acknowledgements. Can we pull this really quick? So you wrote the Black Theater Matters bill. Congratulations. I want to give you credit for the work you've done. Hopefully we can pass it. No, I'm joking. But let's talk about that thing of transparency. You started with that. Why?
Because so much of our industry has been arcane. It's been hidden. It's been veiled, right? And I'm talking specifically about casting. Casting is such a mystery. People don't know what happens until you are part of that room, and it's very hard to be part of that room. Even for me, it was hard to find my way into that room. Even today, I still struggle sometimes to be part of that room. But for me, transparency is important, and one of the ways that I've modeled that on my website is this tab that's called resources. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things I did when I launched Xcasting was I wanted to create a Google document that outlines the CSA casting directors in Los Angeles, New York, and London, and that says what do they cast for, who are they, and how can you submit to them if possible. And I started the document myself, and then I found out that it was taking a long time to finish because it's a lot of work. And I put out a call. I just put it on my social medias, and I was like, hey, I need community activation around this task, because we should be transparent about who we are and what we do and how you can find us. And so many casting directors don't have websites, don't have processes for how to submit to them. Yeah. They sort of want to stay away from you accessing them. You can only access them if you have value, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, I was like, okay, no, the first thing we're going to do is release this document that outlines all the casting directors in these 3 cities. And it's a free download. It's literally on my website. You can click download, and it says it's an offering. It's an offering to Black, Indigenous, POC, trans, queer actors. Like, here's information that's being kept away from you. Take it and do whatever you want to do with it, because it's integral to the development of your career to know who we are, right? And then the second thing I've done is I created a submission form on my website. No other casting office, I believe, has a submission form, like an open submission process. And for me, I'm like, no, please tell me who you are. Like, if you're coming to this website, it's because you want to work, because you're an artist, and I should know you. And so it's an open submission form that you can tell me all these details about you. And in that submission form, there's a section where it says, self-identification is important to me. If you want to share more about how you self-identify, tell me anything. And it's connected to me through an Airtable that's private to Xcasting. And I have hundreds of submissions. And one of the most precious thing that I just like, I'm so grateful for is that, you know, actors are submitting their headshots, their resumes, and all this information about themselves. But then there's always this long paragraph where they type about themselves, where they tell me about how they define themselves, what makes them them. And I think that that's so powerful because it allows me to see more of their story without expecting that their headshot and their resume will tell me their entire story. Right?
That's what I want to kind of talk about right now with this last little bit we got left, the story. So when people talk to me now, I would think the most important thing that happened to me overall in my life right now is that I got hit by a truck. It has completely changed who I am as a human being. It has created me, it has birthed the activist. I would say that, again, 2013, Trayvon Martin happens. I moved to LA, Dorner happens. He's burned alive in Big Bear. Freddie Gray happens. I'm overseas. I lean in a little bit, but at the time I was told, don't engage if you want to be an actor. Don't engage if you want to be an actor. I get hit. I find that my life is only viable as an artist if it's a commodity. Then the accident happens. Then George Floyd happens. Then George Floyd happens. And at this point, it's like you just can't stay silent anymore. You got to do something. However, it's debatable for you because your story starts in 1999. And the way that you write it, or the way that it's written on your website, is 21 years ago, January 1999, Julio Castillo held his arms in the air and was shot by white police officers in his front yard in Linwood, California. He was 16 years old. He was Mexican. He was Victor's cousin. What happens after that period?
Yeah, I mean, even though it was like 21 years ago, it's still, you know, it hurts. And right after Julio was shot, we discovered that 2 weeks prior, someone else had been shot as well. And I'm pulling up her name right now because I think it's important to share. And we had learned that nearby, 4 Riverside white police officers shot Taisha Miller as she laid unconscious inside her locked car. And for me, there was a real revelation that these stories are not being told, right? That before the age of social media, before the age of having the accessibility of a camera phone in our pockets, that so many people like Trayvon, right, like George Floyd, were being murdered. And that their stories hardly ever made national headlines, and that this is not something new. That this is actually the negotiation that Black, Indigenous, POC folks have to live with as they exist in this country. And for me, that the Black Lives Matter movement started way before the Black Lives Matter movement started, right? My family protested the streets in South Central Los Angeles in 1999, wearing shirts, you know, that asked for the end of police brutality. And this is, for me, not far away from like how I see bodies being politicized within our industry, right? And it's not, the violence is not far away. It's actually connected to the violence that we see within our industry. So there are correlations there. But for me, that was a wake-up call about the country I lived in. And it's always made me question how I hold space and how others hold space and how much we are cared for or uncared for. And so often I have to ask people to respect me. So often I have to ask people to give me the grace and the decency of of letting me exist. And I cannot even imagine that me, someone with this privilege of this skin, like right in the spectrum of things, I can't even imagine what it's like for somebody else who has a darker skin tone, what kinds of demands they have to make in their lives just to have an ordinary day, right? Just to live one more day. And so, yeah, for me, you know, this conversation about anti-racism is personal because it's part of my history. And I learned that when I was 11 years old because somebody in my family was taken away. And Julio was 16 years old. He was a child. And just because, you know, if you saw him among people, you might say that he looked like a cholo, whatever, right? Your stereotypical, like, whatever. And that's the fear that many of us have when we live in the imagination of white people, is that they might kill us. And it's real. And I hold that personally. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's where that goes for me.
You did. I just wanted to know what happened out of that period. You've lived through that. 2021's here. This is something I think about a lot. And I think about it almost in a status form. With everything I've accomplished, I always ask myself this question, so I'm going to flip it. With everything you have accomplished, with everything you're accomplishing, as your profile begins to rise, if you were to walk down the street, let's see, down Broadway, go to the market, before you go there, you're wearing a little coat, the cops confuse you for someone and you're shot. Do you think you would get justice in 2021, March?
No.
Okay. That's essentially it. Victor, can you hang out a little bit after the show? There's something I just want to tell you personally. And for everyone else, there's 200-something delegates, but we have one delegate named Maria Cristina Posada Sly, who has a sly comment.
Hey friends, Maria Cristina here with some more super fun facts. Today we're going to talk about how Native Americans are at the greatest risk of sexual violence. On average, American Indians ages 12 and older experience 5,900 sexual assaults per year. American Indians are twice as likely to experience a rape and/or sexual assault compared to all races. 41% of sexual assaults against American Indians are committed by a stranger, 34% by an acquaintance, and 25% by an intimate person or family member. Obviously, these are not fun facts. None of the facts I tell you are fun. It's out of complete sarcasm. But it is important that we know these things and we do not take them lightly.
All right. Now, the ending word I'm going to give to Victor, but I just want to have a moment, one-on-one, really quick. I want to talk to you about the Black Theater Matters bill. It is crunch time. And again, I've been creating these episodes because I feel like in April, we should give a closer, we'll give a bigger push for all these episodes because we'll be that much closer to the convention. There are 12 articles, 12 things that I believe that 500 people being interviewed believe, that people who got the email a little bit late asking for these interviews read the Black Theater Matters bill and now believes will help us become a more equitable space. Article number 1, knowing our history. The creation within the Actors Equity Association of a history and preservation committee will allow us to know from which we came. This is something that the NAACP argues all the time. Without knowing your past, it's tough to know where you are going. And the Actors Equity Association has a very rich history. Good, bad, ugly, all of it is relevant. Some people don't even know that the Actors Equity Association already had their first Black president. It already happened. And that story is very important because it lets you know why we have the relationship we have today with places like the Actors Fund, the Episcopal Actors Guild, and why we used to have the Great Negro Actors Guild. Number two, the Education Act. Once we get that education together, once we get all that information together, it's important that we disperse it through our schools, our universities, our high schools, community, continuing education, community centers. We can actually use this information to help people get pride in union work altogether. Number three, the idea of drag performers, cruise performers, Spanish-speaking theaters, teaching artists. A lot of theater houses, nonprofits specifically, get a lot of their funding through the education part of their proposal. And then they hire actors. And the people who they mostly hire are BIPOC. So before we start going, hey, let's create these jobs, it might behoove us to acknowledge the jobs that already exist. Article 4, AEA members deserve an app. Gretchen, is that her name? Oh, I always forget Greta Thunberg. She has said it enough. How dare you? She has said it enough. We got to do better with the environment. We just have to. Number 5, the idea of fair pay, a fair wage. Sometimes we're asked to deliver lines. Sometimes we're asked to sing. Sometimes we're asked to blow fire out of our mouths. That's a danger. That's something that's considered a specialty skill. And right now, all specialty skills are not created equal. And we need to really be serious about what's considered a specialty skill and what we should advocate for and what we believe is part of our job flat. Another thing, the name of our union. I don't know if the name of the union should be changed. I don't know if it should stay the same. But what I do know is that we should be asked the question. When it comes to mergers, I think Gabrielle Carteris, president of SAG-AFTRA, said it on Yahoo News. This technology is moving faster than we can keep up. And again, I don't know if we should merge, but I know that the Actors Equity Association is in a moment where everything has stood still. And a good strategic plan allows us to decide, should we make ourselves pretty so we can be in control of a merger if it comes? Or should we build ourselves up to one of the greatest equitable unions and stand on our own 2 feet? I don't know, but I know that the members should vote on it. The next one, we need to have land acknowledgements. If X Casting, if X Casting can acknowledge that, they're on the land of the Lenape people, by the way. If they can acknowledge that, I feel that Actors Equity can take it one step further and do the same thing, but add it to our press releases, add it to our information, add it to everything so that we can really be an ally to these groups, especially the Indigenous / First Nations, especially. They're the first. The other one, when it comes to death, one thing I thank God for is that Cicely Tyson made the impact that she did because she gets to get acknowledged. Not everyone gets that. However, with one simple vote on every bit of social media, anytime a member in good standing passes away, they can be acknowledged. When I was writing this bill, I got to work with someone named Sherry Marina. Sherry Marina, who was friends with Carol Sutton, who also passed away, both in New Orleans. She helped me with Article 2, the Education Act. Sherry passed away due to COVID complications and cancer. I haven't heard anything about it from the union. I go into this convention with some of the work that this woman has done. It's part of her legacy now. And I don't think that's enough. I think there's power in just acknowledging and saying someone's name publicly, especially when they are a paid up member in good standing. I don't think celebrity matters when it comes to death. Another thing is that I think we should get more access to our leaders, even if it's open office hours for 2 hours a month, to our executive director and our president. You saw a video earlier from Damian Thompson, who's also a delegate, and we've worked together on this. So he's not only created the Stand By Your Word resolution, but he's also said the same exact thing in this bill. I don't understand how both of those can't make it to the floor, or I would be shocked if neither of them do. And the last one. In June 5th, the Actors Equity Association released the Black Lives Matter resolution. It's wonderful. And I remember being in the meeting for that, in which we were told this is just the starting point. And I believe that the baton always passes on. So, taking that baton, I believe that we can add things to that. For example, the acknowledgement of the contributions of the Negro Actors Guild, the acknowledgement of our people with disabilities who are BIPOC, and really holding the idea that we are attacking disproportionately high numbers. So this episode was a little serious because I really wanted to drive these points home, and then I wanted to show the relation to casting and how we're all in this together. So I want to bring Victor back one more time. Can I get Victor? And I want to end on a happy note. Victor, what makes you hopeful?
You?
An optim.
This? No, really, I wanna speak on that because I think one of the things that really amazes me is how actors are reclaiming their voice in all this, right? And how long they've been silenced before, and how now they're actually taking that power back and saying like, nope, not anymore. So what makes me hopeful are people like you, actors and artists who are creating from their platform and reminding themselves of their power, and not only holding that power, but then extending it outward and holding this industry and our arts accountable. And that makes me hopeful because this work takes all of us, right? None of us can do it alone. And we really, really need each other. So thank you. You make me hopeful.
All right. Before we get any mushy, this has been The Receipts, episode 8. Victor, thank you. I think the world of you. Hang back for a little bit. We're not doing Clubhouse. I'm just going to talk to you after. And everyone, please, if you're a member of Actors Equity Association, even if you're non-union and not a member yet, this still applies to you. And we're going to break that open as we get through these episodes. We are almost to the WandaVision flip. So if you're listening to this episode, I really need you to remember, because there's something that was said today that's going to click for you when I reveal what the flip is. I think we're going to do it around episode 10. But again, right now, we have to think about the money. 877 billion, 4.5 of the GDP, over 5 million jobs. And where is that money going? We have the answer, because we have the smoking gun, which is a budget. We have a budget that breaks open an entire issue that I honestly think is going to change the way we think about theater and at all. Honestly, Victor, this affects you too. It affects the entire industry. I'm saying it with a smile because it's horrifying, but I'm excited. So this has been The Receipts. Thank you.